Hello, everybody. It has been a while since we have done a Facebook Live, and we thought that this topic would be a great thing to talk about since we are seeing it quite a bit with a lot of our clients at the moment. And today's topic is hyperactivity and arousal. And I've got Camille joining us here today for the conversation. Thanks, Camille.
Sure thing. Happy to be here.
So let's dive right in. When we talk about arousal, it's different than drive. It's different than a dog being distracted. What exactly is arousal?
So the simplest way to put it is that arousal really is just excitement. So it's not directed at anything. It's just your dog being excited. Now, arousal in itself is not something that's bad, and every dog has it, and we kind of want them to have arousal or excitement, especially when we're working with them, because that means they're having a good time. The problem is really when we tip into over-arousal, and we kind of go over the limit of the dog, and now we're so excited that we can't really think or do anything. And I like that you said it's different from drive, because a lot of times I hear a lot, my dog is high drive or high energy, when people really mean my dog has high arousal. So, just for clarity's sake, I figured it's like a good thing to define terms that we're kind of all on the same page when we talk about that stuff. So drive is really just motivation or focus to engage in a particular activity. So dogs that have toy drive are dogs that are very willing and very motivated to work for toys or engage with toys and play with toys. And then when we use energy or high energy dogs, what we really mean are dogs that have a lot of stamina. So dogs that can, run 10 miles without slowing down. They can keep up, no problem whatsoever. So those three things are different, although sometimes they can be jumbled when you're really, really lucky and you have a dog that is high drive, high energy, and high arousal, which actually that, usually is most teenagers kind of fall right in the smack middle of that. So we thought, it was a good idea to kind of talk about that because arousal gets in the way of a lot of our training, and because it doesn't get recognized for what it is, a lot of times it doesn't get addressed because we don't actually understand the cause of the issue. A lot of times I see people, oh, my dog just blew me off. Well, actually, your dog is overstimulated and over-aroused, and they can't think in that scenario. So that's why we really wanted to have it talk about, arousal and what it is and what we can do about it.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned that it's not inherently a bad thing. There are certain circumstances where we might want a little bit of arousal. For me, when I think of arousal, I think of dogs that are getting ready to do dryland mushing or mushing sports. We usually see quite a bit of arousal at the start line. But if we have too much arousal in our dogs, then we can start to run into trouble because then we can start to see a lot of undesired behaviors that where the dog might turn around and redirect some jumping or mouthing on us and cause harm. And they're not being a bad dog. They don't certainly mean to do it. It's just they are kind of overwhelmed and unable to kind of contain that excitement. So when we think of arousal, I get a really clear picture in my head of what that dog looks like. Camille, do you want to describe what that dog looks like?
Sure. And so the fun thing about arousal is it can look vastly different from dog to dog depending on their personality. So the most flagrant, what I think it comes to most people's mind when they hear over arousal is the frantic dog that just is bouncing everywhere. And that's definitely part of arousal. So dogs that are overexcited will tend to be a little bit frantic. They'll have a lot of unuseful movement, right? They'll just be moving for no purpose, just going I just need to keep going. But in some dogs, especially dogs that are more, I want to say introverted or quiet or just kind of internalize things, that can just be disengaging. So I see it with my shepherd a lot when we go into the woods and he'll just be sniffing and not really paying attention, and it's a struggle to get him working. And that's not because he's being I don't care about you. It's just that in the moment, he's just too excited about the smells, what's going on, and he just can't focus and he's just looking around. But some major things that I usually, in my mind, I go, ooh, that might be over arousal are obviously frantic, zoomies, dogs that just run for no reason, dogs that get really vocal when they're working or engaging in a typical activity, when your dog gets really mouthy and nippy or have a really hard mouth when they're taking treats, that's usually a sign that they're a little bit too stimulated. We have jumping, especially that kind of craze jumping when a dog just doesn't stop it and it's really not serving a purpose. It kind of falls into that frantic movement. I need to do something. I don't know what to do. I'm just going to do it. Humping also is usually a good sign of over-arousal, especially with dogs playing together. When you have dogs that start humping, usually it means that they're a little bit too excited. Um, and again, the disengagement. So, dog that is, sniffing everywhere, not able to stay focused, not willing to engage. That's usually a sign that my dog might be a little bit too stimulated, or too excited, and that we need to do some kind of a calming activity or take time to kind of just take it in before we really ask for anything more than that.
Yeah. You can also see, I find that this is a little more common in our herding breeds, but you can see a dog kind of snapping. It's like they're barking or chomping to catch a treat, but, without vocalization. And I think that if you observe very carefully, which sometimes is hard in certain circumstances, if we are seeing a lot of that kind of movement, those movement patterns that are just keeping the dog in motion. But you'll also see, dilated pupils. You can see an increased respiration rate. We're seeing those physiological changes inside the dog as well. And that's really what we need to do as people is, we talk a lot about stress signaling and learning how to identify signals of stress, like licking lips and yawning and looking away. And we need to be able to do the same thing for arousal, because arousal is one of those things where it can kind of be a sliding scale. On one side, we've got a dog that can pay attention and work really well and is super focused. And then they can slip further and further and further. And the further they go, the less likely it is for us to be able to kind of rein them in quickly, and get their brain back to kind of a working state or a functional state. Arousal can also, like you mentioned, be different. Signals that we might see or different behaviors from the dog. There are also different things like breed and age that do impact arousal, where we're more likely to see. I think one of these big changes is as our puppies go from little baby puppies towards sexual maturity, we go through that adolescent developmental stage, and that's where we can see a lot of these behaviors increase, which is often why people don't like teenage dogs because they are a lot to deal with. And we think of them as being unruly and testing the boundaries, but oftentimes there's a huge arousal component there as well. So, what other things are for you kind of big markers where you might see an increase? What are other contributors for arousal?
Sure. So I think one of the most common situation where dogs tend to get over into arousal are context specific. So things like playing with other dogs, that's inherently very stimulating, and so a lot of dogs just get overexcited when they do that. Or if they're doing an activity that they really really enjoy, like mushers, when they get hooked up ready to go, you can tell because they're excited, they know what's going to happen. So there are activities that inherently create arousal. I think a lot of age definitely plays a role into it. Teenage dogs pretty much across the board all struggle with over-arousal to some varying degrees. Some are more sensitive to it than others, but they pretty much all of their issues stem from just not being able to control themselves whatsoever and getting very excited. Another one is breed. Some breeds are known and were created for their propensity to get into arousal very easily. So the Belgian Malinois is a great example. Our little pit bulls, I have one staying with me right now, and she just cracks me up because she'll go from flat out, snoring to "Hey, let's go" when she's another dog, because that's her breed, right? They're just very quick to escalate. Another thing too is temperament, right? Some dogs naturally are just like people. Some of us are really quick to anger or like strong emotions. Some are very placid. Same things happen with dogs, and sometimes dogs are just naturally born that way, where they just very easily kind of scale up very quickly. So those are pretty much, I would say, the four most major contributors that we don't usually have much control over because they're kind of inherent to the environment of the dog. Two other that I usually add that are, usually controllable are learned behavior. So the dog is anticipating that arousal from happening. And that happens when you do sports. Agility dogs, same thing. When you get ready to run, everybody starts to scream because they're anticipating the fun to happen. Or human action. So a lot of times we do things that can accidentally create arousal. A lot of it is just movement, sound that tends to be stimulating, especially for puppies and young dogs. So that can kind of trigger arousal, escalate it before they have a chance to really just kind of get ready. And then the way we play with dogs too. So a lot of times with my young puppies, when I have families, I always have, well, the puppy's great with the adults, but with the kids, he's really rough. And I'm like, what do you think that is? Because the kids play rough with him too. Do you think he might just be excited to be with the kids because kids are exciting? Yeah. So that creates that learned behavior to dog because it's always reinforcing, it's always an arousing and exciting activity. Then the dog just naturally gets that natural spike in arousal when the activity presents itself because their body just gets used to it. And I think those two things are things that we need to be careful about because we don't always realize how we create those patterns or where that arousal comes from. And that's what I really want to help to when we do our webinars, to kind of identify those patterns and how to have strategies in place so that you can kind of either cut down the arousal when it happens or be able to create those activities without layering it with that over arousal, which really gets in our way.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you mentioned that example about the kids, because I think that that is something that is often overlooked. And we know, both of us are admins in the Pandemic Puppy Facebook group. And a lot of times we see dogs go through a transition, right? When they're little, they go to puppy social class. They're always engaged with other dogs. They always get to say hi to all the people. So people and other puppies have often brought these really great things. And then we transition to start to do, maybe some loose leash walking. Now we want the dog to focus and to do obedience skills and to ignore the other dog. And we often see a lot of what we would kind of call reactive behavior, right? Pulling towards them, barking. And a lot of that is, of course, frustration because we cannot reach the other dog or person. But a lot of it, too, is arousal the moment they see them, because historically, what have they been able to do? They've been able to interact. And oftentimes that interaction is very exciting and arousing for them. And so the sight of that other dog can often bring up these big emotions up, because that's what historically has happened for that dog. And so I think it's really important, if we do live with a dog that maybe has a lot of emotions, a dog that struggles with arousal, think about things that we are doing in our life and things that we have been doing, because it's possible that we as people have not created, the best environment for our dog to learn peacefully. And we might accidentally be kind of perpetuating some of these arousal rehearsals. I think that brings us really nicely too into kind of our what not to do, our mistakes, because a lot of the times I see, I think of the stereotypical teenager that's on leash, super aroused, might look distracted. Maybe some other dogs have passed. We're trying to work on loose leash walking. And all of a sudden the dog turns around, starts jumping on the person, maybe humping, mouthing. That's a very common sign of over arousal and overstimulation. And it's not like the dog has just been doing zoomies and going crazy, right? The dog just kind of looks distracted for a moment, was walking fine on leash, and all of a sudden redirects back towards us. And so I think that that is a situation where we need to be aware of our environment and where we're training our dogs, because there are certain environments that are going to make it easier for our dogs to be successful at rehearsing more calm behaviors. And there are certain environments that, at least right now in our training plan, are not going to be good, because it's going to push the dog into that state of being over aroused. And then kind of in conjunction with that, what do we do in the moment, right? Our dog is already having this big outburst. And if you've got a big Malamute jumping on you, a normal reaction is like, oh my gosh, get down, but a lot of that energy that we bring to the table can then make it even worse. So what are some common mistakes that people are maybe doing, but could accidentally be making the challenge worse?
Sure. So I think the number one thing I see, especially with puppies and young dogs, is lots of movement and lots of talking to them. So puppy starts to bite and they're getting frantic and go, oh, stop it, no, come, get off, come sit, go ahead. And you're just creating so much more excitement and movement, and the puppy's brain is just going, oh my God, explosion of dopamine, I don't know what's going on, more, less, I don't know. So that's the one. And even with reactive dogs too, especially with teenagers, no, stop it, come here. And then we pull and we move and we're trying to go around and prevent them from watching. And it creates this whole movement and excitement and things, and it's a whirlwind. And they can't just, what? calm down. And it's really tough because when our dogs are in that level of like overexcitement, you can't think anymore. They're, some dogs you could wave a steak in front of their nose and they won't even see it because they're just completely caught up and like, oh my God, I'm freaking out. So the best thing to do, usually that's why I always have, is go quiet and distance right away. So remove the dog from the situation as quickly and quietly as we can. So that means walking away, even if the dog is just bouncing up. Nope, we're just gonna quietly go to a spot where it's gonna be calmer, and then we're gonna stop and be still, take a breath. Dog and human, right? Because I need to be calm and quiet too. The more active I am, the more I'm gonna create activity in my dog. In fact, that's why also a lot of times when we work on recalls, we tell people you have to be exciting. When you call your dog, you want to cheer them on, come on, to get them excited and committed to coming back to you. Because if you're just sitting there, hey buddy, come here, it's boring. Nothing's gonna happen. So we can use that, on the opposite side, if we needed to calm our dogs down, or at least to be really aware of how much excitement we're generating by how much we're talking or moving. So that's my number one, is being really aware of body language and making sure that we're very calm and kind of giving that calm energy back to our dogs and not, oh my God, getting even more agitated. The number two thing, I think, the big mistake I see is, again, the environment of, putting our dogs in situations that they just can't handle. And sometimes it's from the fact that we don't recognize our dogs are being over-aroused, because it, just like you said, it can just jump in. The dog is walking, sniffing the floor, looks like he's distracted, and suddenly they're lunging and jumping and biting. And so we just miss those little cues that maybe our dog was a little bit more excited than we thought. And then, or thinking our dogs are willfully misbehaving and being difficult and being tough because, well, why can't you handle this? When really they just don't have much of a choice in the matter. Their brain is just not able to compute. So, using your environments very carefully. So with all my teenagers, my dog's included, and my dog is a very well socialized puppy. He's been pretty much heavily socialized to lots of dogs. And so when he was 7 months old up until 10 months old, he was very excited to see dogs on trails because he had the experience of dogs are my friends, we're supposed to play. So we took a big step back into our hiking. We took it down. We did less hikes so that we didn't just keep rehearsing that excitement pattern over and over. And we went to really quiet trails or trails that we're really familiar with, so that that level of excitement of, ooh, we're somewhere new, shiny, exciting, wasn't there, because he's like, oh, whatever, we've been here like a million times. This is the same smells as usual. So that we had an environment that was a little bit challenging for him, because we did still see dogs, but it was a little bit easier. I didn't just throw him in the middle of, Piedmont Park and go, let's go, let's try to not react to everything we see. So you really want to be conscious of that and trying to set your dogs up for success as much as possible. I would rather err on the side of being too cautious, so taking my dogs to too boring environments and having them be super successful because it's too easy for them, than pushing them into an environment that's too difficult, and then we're having big reactions, because that's gonna really kind of set your training back, especially since arousal is very much something that happens in the brain with chemicals. Yeah, you have a big dopamine rush when it happens, and the brain remembers that, and then it sensitizes the brain the next time it comes around to get into that rush even faster. So you really want to be careful about it. It's not just, ooh, no big deal, we'll do better next time. It's, well, yeah, but over time, if you keep putting your dog through this, it's going to be harder and harder, because your dog is going to be more and more and more sensitive to that arousal and get there faster and faster, and it'll be harder and harder to get them down from there. So you really want to be mindful of that. And also just simplify your life. Why put yourself and your dog through like the hurdles and having to deal with it when you can just be like, hey, let's just go somewhere easy so we can both enjoy just hanging out and having a good time together.
I'm really glad you brought up that example with Cole, because it wasn't that you had to completely eliminate that activity from your routine. It was still something you guys enjoyed, but you were able to find a way to kind of make it a little less exciting. Because you're right, that novelty, going somewhere new, a new trail, new smells, new environment, all of that can kind of increase the dog's arousal. But by going to the same place, you kind of made it a little easier for the dog. And I'm also glad you brought up the Piedmont Park episode or example, because if you think about it, oftentimes when we think of an environment that could be really challenging for a dog, we think of like super busy, bikes, scooters, people walking, people playing frisbee, cars, an outdoor patio. But it doesn't have to be that exciting in order to stimulate our dog. Yes, of course, if we have a dog that's easily excitable and easily aroused, we certainly would want to avoid those places. But if you're walking your dog in your neighborhood and your dog was doing really well on a loose leash and then all of a sudden redirects to you, even if you didn't see any other signs, that redirection right there is a signal to you that something in that environment was too much. And so then it's our job to kind of put on our detective glasses and go, okay, what about this, happened? Did maybe a dog passed right before that happened? Maybe there were a few dogs, maybe there was a car, right? We kind of have to figure out what in the environment was causing the dog trouble. And of course, remember that this often, when we work with a trainer, when we're doing our job as dog owners, is a more of a short term kind of experience. Certainly, as you mentioned, all dogs have arousal, but this over arousal is often associated with short periods of time in their life. So simplify things. Don't put your dog in those situations so that your dog doesn't continue to rehearse that, because we certainly don't want that over arousal to get stronger and more normal for that dog. Let's quickly talk about indoor environments, because I know often for our teenagers, we can see this over arousal happen indoors as well. If we've got kids, if we have a cat in the house, maybe another dog, we can struggle with these behaviors that are undesired in the home as well. How much of this in the home are we going to be using management for as prevention?
A lot, a lot. I always tell my puppy people, hey, don't put those baby gates and playpens and crates away when the puppy's like potty trained at 6 months, because you're going to need them about 2 months later again. I actually use more management with my teenagers than I do with my puppies. So my puppies are contained for potty training so that they just can't pee everywhere, and safety because puppies will eat everything and they'll just die. But my teenagers are very, very, very managed throughout the day for lots of things. And that can be just having baby gates so that we can't like chase the cat around the house every day, every hour of the day, even though the cat's always been there, but now it's fun to chase after it. If I have multiple dogs, I have playpens so that we can spend time apart and everybody takes a nap, so they're not constantly playing with each other and getting themselves all riled up. Taking time out in the yard at different times too, so we can get quiet time outside, so that outside is not just party city, where they're just going to get super excited every time we go in the yard. And also, I usually tend to curate my dog's experiences indoors, especially if I have like visitors coming, or if I have activities around the house that I know are going to be challenging. So now my dog is in his crate with a bone because I don't want to find out if he's going to chew a pillow or something while I'm doing something else. When I have guests coming over, and it's a big one, I usually tell a lot of people, even when they have puppies, is to do, part training, part management. So a lot of times when I have people visiting, we'll spend a good 10, 15 minutes working on good manners, saying hi properly without jumping, hanging out in your place, not begging the guests, just retrieving something, maybe bringing a toy instead of being mouthy or jumpy. And then my dog is going to go away for 45 minutes to an hour with a chew in his crate. Why? Because I actually would enjoy people in my house and not just train my dog the entire time, but also because I want my dog to learn people in the house is boring. I don't want to spend 2 hours training my dog when first people are inside, because what am I teaching my dog? Oh my God, when people come over, let me tell you, they pet me, they play with me, my human feeds me nonstop. This is like Disney World. And so over time, what happens every time somebody shows up at the door, the dog expects those 2-3 hours of pure bliss and awesomeness. And so they get more and more excited. So from the get-go, nope, this is really going to be boring. You're going to say hi for a couple minutes, and then you're going to go away and do something else. So that over time, when I see people coming, like, oh, hey, whatever, I'm just going to go chew, because that's what I always do. So management is a huge part of helping control arousal. Because again, once your dog gets into that over-aroused state, it's really difficult to come back down. It's really hard for them to think. So once you're there, it's too late, right? We're like, well, now we're just going into damage control. So you really want to be proactive with it and kind of set up the environment as best as you can, so that your dog can make good choices, and then you can reward them for being calm and making it as easy as possible for them not to get that overstimulated and going, I'm just going to lose it. And then we get frustrated because our dog is being nutty, and it just kind of snowballs into, again, more arousal, because we get mad and we just stop it, come on, let's go. And like, oh my God, no, you can't catch me. And then you have zoomies around the house, and then the human's like, and then it's an hour before anyone calms down. And then, pretty much as soon as you release your dog, they're back to doing that again because now it's become a pattern. So you want to definitely management of baby gates, crates, playpens, harness and a tether or a drag leash if you need to redirect your dog away from stuff so that it's easy and you don't have to get like super vocal or super animated to kind of get them to come back, or long line in the yard if your dog likes to rush the fence and bark at people that cross behind. Hey, let's not do that. Let's just calmly, let's go back inside, cool down. When the yard is empty, then we'll go back out. I think those are really, really easy ways to ensure that everybody maintains their sanity and we just don't go crazy. Because again, too, over-arousal, especially when it comes to puppies or teenagers, is pretty much temporary. Yes, some of them, it's their personality and they'll still, even as adults, be quick to arousal, but for the most part, most puppies and teenagers, thankfully, mature out of that phase at some point. So it's really just temporary and just, again, making sure that, okay, let's not practice bad behavior. Once your brain is actually able to control itself, then we can kind of put you into situations and really ask for you to do actual training and not just manage them as best as we can.
Yeah. I think the other common thing too that I will see is people confuse arousal with hyperactivity and the dog needing exercise. And so oftentimes as we start to see this shift from puppyhood into adolescence, we start to see a dog that is quick to jump into over-arousal. People will jump to activities like fetch and frisbee and taking the dog on a run because they think, well, the dog just has a ton of energy and it needs more activity. And certainly that's dangerous for physical reasons because our dogs are still maturing. But we also want to remember that this is not related to a lack of exercise. Certainly, if the dog is getting no exercise, our arousal can be even more challenging. But know that this is not something that you can exercise out of the dog. If we are exercising the dog to the point where we don't see arousal, we're doing way too much exercise. We're building an insane athlete, and you're likely doing it when the dog is too young for them to safely be able to tolerate it. So again, that is certainly not something that we want to do with them. I find that when we are talking about arousal and talking about solutions for arousal, we kind of have two separate plans. One of them is like in the heat of the moment. It's that, oh shoot, things kind of, I did not expect this and now this is happening and I've got to figure out a way to get the dog back to a thinking place, right? Instead of this state of over-arousal. And then we have kind of the more long-term game plan where we practice specific activities in normal context to help the dog learn how to control that excitement. And these are some of the activities that you're going to be covering in your upcoming webinar. So talk to us a little bit about what people can expect to learn and kind of gain from your webinar and who it might be valuable for.
Sure. So yeah, we're going to split the webinar pretty much two big sections. One is going to be kind of the general impulse control activities or arousal control activities that you can do kind of in the background long term to help your dog cope with being able to control themselves when they're excited. So we're going to do a lot of dynamic impulse control. A lot of times, most traditional impulse control exercises, things like leave it or stay or even just place, tend to be very static, right? We usually do them in very sterile environments because we want our dogs to be successful and learn, which is totally fine because they need to learn it before we can ask them to do it. But there's always this kind of gap between, okay, we've done place, in the basement quietly, and now we're at a restaurant and my dog can't do it. And so we're trying to kind of bridge that gap and how to get there and help the dog manage that level of excitement without it being so difficult that they can't do it. So we'll do a lot of that, things that you can do in the background to really kind of help exercise that muscle. Because I usually like to see, arousal control as a muscle in my dog's brain. And the more they flex it, the better they become at it. And then you can really play around with getting them really, really excited and then, no, really excited and stop. So that's going to be a lot of what we're going to do, the long-term behind the scenes work. And then we're going to do a section pretty much on what to do in the moment. Because playing It's Your Choice or red light green light game is awesome, but it's not going to help you when you're at the park and your dog is losing its mind because the squirrel just popped out of nowhere. So we're going to do what actionable things you can actually do in the moment to kind of help bring them down safely, so that we're not creating more of an issue for ourselves, and kind of get them back on track so that we can kind of finish our walk or whatever activity we're doing on a good note instead of being, well, now every time we go for a walk, it's going to end badly because our dog is getting excited. We're also going to talk a lot about, again, body language, human actions that tend to contribute to over-arousal. We're going to talk about reinforcement strategies, especially with our dogs who are super food motivated. Talking to you, all my lab owners, when they see a cookie and it just loses their mind. Hey, yes, your reinforcer is very exciting, but you need to be able to take it calmly, take it gently, and not just lose your mind just because I brought out some kind of reinforcer. So we want to be really clear with our dogs what reinforcer they have access to, when they can get it. And that's something that we're going to see a lot of my dog doing because he's very toy driven and he tends to want to get the toy before I'm ready to give him the toy, which leads to a lot of frustration on his part. Then he yells at me because he's a shepherd. Or biting, because he's trying to grab the toy and the toy is not ready to be grabbed and my hand is in the way. So we've worked a lot on very clear cues of now you can have it and where you can have the toy, from my hand, from the floor, from my arm. And we can do the same thing with food so that our dog are not confused, they're not getting frustrated, and they're not getting themselves like over, wait, when is it coming? You'll know exactly when and where it's coming. So we'll do a lot of those like really neat things that are really helpful. And it's applicable to dogs any age. Again, most of the dogs that tend to struggle with over-arousal tend to be teenagers and puppies. So this, I think, is going to be really, really useful for our puppy and teenage owners. But again, if you have even an adult dog that is, high energy, easily aroused, and that you're kind of like struggling to find ways to get them to settle inside the house or not just kind of always be busy buddies, this is going to be a really, really good webinar for you as well. And we'll also go into like how you can actually, manage their behavior seamlessly, easily, and what kind of activities, low-key activities you can do to get them to relax and settle instead of, let's go play fetch for half an hour in the yard. And then your dog comes back and sleeps for 20 minutes and then they go, okay,
Ready to go again.
Yeah, do it again. And then, next time it's going to be 2 hours of fetch before they're tired. So we really want to be, again, like smart about the activities we give our dogs so that we actually get relaxation and not just physical exhaustion that does nothing for their brain and still leaves them, okay, I'm exhausted, but I'm still awake. So we're going to go kind of over all of that together.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that frustration too, and those reinforcement strategies, telling the dog when they can have that reinforcer and how they're going to receive it, I think is so key, because oftentimes what we don't realize is that when our dog is starting to become overstimulated and over-aroused, frustration on their part, where they expect something to happen and then it doesn't happen, can really easily increase their arousal level. I see that often in training. If we're trying to teach a complex behavior and maybe an owner is not quite reinforcing when they should be, or maybe the dog is doing what they have been doing, right? But now they're not getting a treat. Maybe we're a little slow to deliver that treat. We can see the dog start to escalate a little bit because they are frustrated, and then that can increase that arousal and make it worse too. So having solutions for the way that you train your dog all the way down to how you're delivering that reinforcer, and then teaching the dog how to expect it, will decrease frustration for the dog and make everything easier for the owner as well. So Camille, before we head out here, I have a link for everybody in the details here for this chat on the webinar. If you're watching this live, I do recommend that you sign up, because as a bonus with the webinar, not only do you get to watch the webinar, but you get access to a private community for 2 weeks where you actually get coaching. So she's going to give you a bunch of skills to practice, and you can prop your phone up and hit record and submit video footage into the group for trainer feedback. She can let you know if you're doing it right, things to kind of tweak to improve your dog's behavior. To really make sure that you are getting the most out of this webinar, does come with that coaching. You can ask questions. You basically get unlimited trainer access during that time. If you happen to catch this after the webinar has already aired, we will be offering a recorded version of this webinar, but it doesn't come with those 2 weeks of coaching. So definitely take advantage of that. Before we head out, Camille, any last minute tips or things that you would like to say to our people that might be watching that might struggle with some dogs that are easily over-aroused?
So I would say, there's light at the end of the tunnel. But again, just kind of remembering that arousal doesn't come out of nowhere. And so if you just find yourself or your dog into that situation, kind of like, ooh, okay, let's dial it back. What kind of happened and how did we get here? And what could we have done to kind of not get to that point? Maybe more distance, or less time, or anything like that. And that your dog is not misbehaving. They're not doing it on purpose. Especially if you have a younger dog, they're really just struggling with it. It's difficult for them to kind of get a hang of it. And so just again manage, and then take things slow. Nobody says you have to go on 5 hikes a week in busy parks for your dog to be socialized or well trained. If it's too much and if it's a struggle, it's completely fine to go, okay, let's take a break for a little bit. And even for your dog, sometimes it's really good for them to just decompress. Let's take a week where we just don't do stuff. We just stay home, really quiet, kind of gather ourselves, and then we'll have a plan and kind of keep going forward. So know that it's normal. All dogs go through these phases. It's a normal part of dog ownership. So your dog is not abnormal, and you're not doing anything wrong. But just being aware, I think, is the biggest thing, is to be aware that what it is, how it comes to be, what we do that kind of creates it, is one of the first ways to really help and be like, okay, this is not just normal dogs. We're onto something there, and just being mindful of that.
Yeah, I think my tip would be to be observant about the body language that you're seeing and when you're seeing it. And honestly, go old school, grab a journal out of a closet and start journaling about it, because chances are, even if you're unaware of any patterns right now, chances are once you start really being mindful of it, you're going to start to find some patterns. And it's really important for us as trainers and dog owners to be able to find those patterns in order to come up with a solution. Because when we are trying to modify behavior, we have to know in what context it happens. We have to know what happens before, during, and after. And if you can start doing some of that groundwork on your own, it'll be easier for you to start to identify those situations that are too much for your dog, so that you can start making some changes and not putting them in situations where they're going to fail. Because it's so important for arousal that, even though we do consider it, often temporary, where they have bouts of over arousal, it's not something where we can just wait it out and it'll get better. It's not something we can just ignore or completely manage. There are training setups we have to do, and we have to do them correctly in order to see improvement. So start journaling, start figuring out contexts that are too much for your dog, and that will help you better address areas where your dog needs more work and how you might be able to help them. So if this was helpful for you guys, thanks for tuning in, and please do check out the webinar. There is a link to the website where you can register for that. It's going to be a great one, and it's so important. We all want our dogs to be well-mannered, and we all want to teach loose leash walking and how to be calm with guests. And this is really that base foundation that a lot of people are missing in that training plan. So if you're on the edge, definitely consider signing up for it. I think you guys will get a lot of enjoyment out of this and a lot of progress with your dog. Less stress, more success. Camille, thank you so much for joining me today, and we will all talk soon.